This video is brought to you by NCIX.com. Great technology, selection, and service. Hello everyone, this is Dmitry with Hara Canucks and welcome to our first ever camera review on the channel. So give us a like if you want to see more camera reviews in the future. But this is the Fed 2. This is a Soviet-made SLR in the 1950s. It still works. It's my grandfather's. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because this type of retro design is now coming back in today's world with, of course, optical, mechanical, and digital differences. So, on the review table today, we have this. This is the Fujifilm X30, keeping true to that form factor, that beautiful aesthetical retro/vintage design. But is it trying to compensate for something with its pretty body? Well, let's find out. So the X30 runs for $600 and it's definitely a step up from your standard point and shoot, and I feel the build quality, all the manual controls and all the features are all worth the price. And to quickly get the specs out of the way, the sensor here is 2/3 of an inch X-Trans CMOS 2. It's slightly smaller than what is found on competing cameras. It captures 12 megapixels JPEG and RAW, 1080p movie recording at 60 frames, optical zoom of 4x, ISO range of up to 12,800. There's a 256 zone metering for exposure control, built-in image stabilization, maximum shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second. There's full manual control for bracketing, white balance, focus, and even more, an electronic viewfinder, a 3-inch display at the back, wireless communications, and it survives for about 500 shots per charge. Coming back to the form, the camera is gorgeous. You can see the metal frame combined with this rubberized midsection brings an awesome sense for handling, and this is no doubt will be one of the main selling points of the X30. Even the top dials are made of metal, like the exposure compensation on the right, the mode dial right beside it, and the shutter button itself strongly resembles the release design on my own 60-year-old camera. Now let's talk about handling. The camera is fairly compact, not exactly pocket size, as you can see the lens protrudes in there, but if you want to do some street photography, you'll still be able to remain that low profile and low key of taking pictures and not really standing out with the gigantic lens and a DSLR. The large rubber dimple at the front helps to secure the grip, plus a smaller one at the back for your thumb keeps the camera in place just in case. You switch the camera on by turning the lens, and if you're looking for that DSLR feel, this is definitely in line with the manual zoom lenses, and that seems to be the trend with the X30, offering all the manual controls for this sort of high profile point and shoot camera. Although I would prefer a standard on button, as the lens protrudes when you turn on the camera, the lens cap can be displaced easily, and say you just want to view your pictures, you have to sort of go through this cumbersome process. The lens is at 28 to 112 millimeters on a full frame equivalent focal length. It provides a good range of optics from wide enough angle to close enough zoom, which is in line to competing cameras like the Sony RX100 Mark II. The zoom could be smoother though, that's really the only downside of being manual. It hiccups on our sample at 35 and 50 millimeters, almost like a hard stop, but you avoid the common lag you get with automatic zoom lenses. The aperture is not constant throughout the zoom. You get f2.0 at the widest angle and f2.8 with a telephoto, still letting plenty of light in for low light shooting. The ring behind the lens is an awesome feature that can be programmed to change any of your exposure parameters, can be used to pull focus even, cycle through different picture modes and profiles, and the best part is how smooth and responsive it feels. There's also another dial at the back for your thumb that's a little bit too light, and almost always I nudge it without noticing and change my settings all of a sudden. It's mainly used to adjust your f-stop and the shutter speed, and using this discrete button at the front of the body that can be easily pressed with your middle finger, you switch between these two parameters in manual mode. The 3-inch 920K dot display at the back has some articulation, but it is quite limited for only low and high angle shooting. It's unfortunate you can't fully rotate it. It's not a touchscreen, but the viewing angles are good and response time is fast. It's bright enough outside, but there's also an excellent electronic viewfinder with 2.36 million dots, and it's also OLED. It's large and detailed with 100% coverage, meaning what you see through the viewfinder is what you'll get. The sensor beside it can be modified to switch the display or EVF only, or turn off the display when you approach the EVF, which is that perfect hybrid. The built-in pop-up flash is easily accessible for direct flash only. You cannot angle it for bounce, and it's automatically disabled when in silent or macro mode, so keep that in mind. The 12 megapixel 2/3 inch CMOS 2 sensor is quite capable. You can still achieve shallow depth of field with a bit of zoom and awesome macro abilities with 1 centimeter minimum focus distance, with the lens at 28mm. The image stabilization works well for handheld macros. All the pictures you see now are all shot with handheld. And given the sort of large form factor, it's not exactly compact. Fujifilm could have outfitted this with a larger 1-inch sensor, similar to what is found on the Sony RX100 line, but as you can see, clearly funding was distributed somewhere else, and that's your compromise. The battery life is pretty decent. You'll get a few days of shooting no problem, and everything is recorded to an SD card. Video mode on the X30 is present. There's a dedicated record button beside the shutter release. This is a terrible spot that's sort of blocked by the exposure comp tile, but good thing that you can remap the movie mode to any button on the back, and that was the first thing I did. The camera records at 1080p at 60 frames a second, so you can do some slow-mo effects, pretty cool. Internal processing isn't terrible, plus it has a fairly high bitrate. My only points of critique here would be the incredibly inaccurate and slow autofocus, especially if you're doing any types of zooms. It has very difficult time catching the subject in focus. The stereo microphones pick up reference audio just fine, but there's a side mini mic jack. Unfortunately, that's not 3.5mm, but there's also an odd micro HDMI for video output. Don't know why that's there. And there's also a micro USB for charging the battery and transferring things from the camera. If you are feeling artistic, you can set focus to manual with the dial on the front, and your options are single, continuous, or manual, and this way you can actually achieve some interesting video format, and the smoothness of the control ring really benefits manual focus. So the X30 for pictures I find satisfactory. It can shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time. Just make sure you have a fast SD card for this dual format capture. The X30 can do 12 frames burst in JPEG, and I found autofocus reliable, and very impressed with the dynamic range that you can fine-tune from 100 to 400% in the settings, and that gives the extra detail in the highlights. Here's a side-by-side JPEG versus edited RAW, and this extreme to dark to light picture shows that even the JPEG, while still blowing out the highlights, shows an impressive amount of dynamic range. ISO performance is okay up to 3200, but this is not a low light shooter. Anything above 3200 and you get smudgy pixels, loss of detail, but I do have to praise them for noise reduction. The default setting can seriously clean up your images without super negative after effects. It does leave your shadows and all those spots a little bit soft, but if you really want to touch up your images, just shoot RAW. The X30 has Wi-Fi capabilities for remote shooting and transferring photos, and I love that I can connect my phone to the camera, either iOS or Android, and transfer the photos to Instagram and maybe back up a few of my favorite captures of the day. You do have to go through this process every time, so enable the Wi-Fi and connect to the camera through the Fujifilm app, but it's still faster in my opinion for sharing than having to offload the SD card. And from my time with the camera, you really get a sense of handling something like this, a combination of retro and modern with the X30. Really the best camera feature are all the manual adjustments. If you want to have full accessible control of everything that's there on the body, and you can remap things, you can adjust what the rings do, and that's really good to see. The electronic viewfinder is awesome, fast focus for pictures, and even Wi-Fi link is great. 1080p video capture at 60 frames a second is alright, and really amazing macro results round this out for an all-inclusive package. Plus, don't forget RAW capture. Pictures come out really sharp with great lighting, but you come indoor and the conversation changes, as the smaller sensor has difficulty with retaining detail and high ISO performance is just not passable. I really wish that the dedicated exposure compensation dial at the top was something else, because the only time I've actually used the exposure compensation was when I was outside. I didn't want to blow out the skies, set it to -1 and went on my way. But that's easily done in the software regardless, and if this was a customizable dial, you can put it maybe to ISO or shutter speed, then you would actually come to use it more often. I also am not a big fan of the turning on mechanism, especially because if you want to just view your pictures, you have to take off the entire cap, and it's a little bit cumbersome process. Plus, the video record button beside it is in a very difficult spot to access if you have bigger fingers. Luckily, that's remappable. So the bottom line, the X30, you know, it's high in appearance, it's high in features. The best feature is all the manual controls that are right there, but the main compromise is its sensor size. So if you can, you know, face the limitations, if you can work around the sensor size and its high poor ISO performance and poor low light, then you might actually love the X30. So guys, thank you so much for watching. This concludes our Fujifilm X30 review. Let us know how we did on our first ever camera review here at Hardware Canucks. Don't forget to like if you found this review helpful. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.